And so to understand this, we really have to go back to the first 18 months of life. There are two things that are happening right away, basically from conception, that we used to say from the third trimester, but from conception we are logging this memory, this ability to cope emotionally, our habits of responding to the people around us. And one of the things that affects that is trust. First of all, trust is, the first thing that we develop, and or not, depending on our situation. If our caretakers are able to provide for our needs in a healthy way, then we have trust, and if not, we have a mistrust. And so that fundamental trust issue affects these boundaries. Can I trust my environment? Can I trust other people? Can I trust myself? And so that trust is a foundational issue that most of us have at least some work to do on. But the other thing that's vital to understand about this is your brain doesn't understand no. No doesn't have hardly any meaning to your brain. So we have a saying that we use, and it's don't say don't.
Yeah, don't say don't is a hard thing to do because we're so used to, even to this day for me, I've practiced very hard to be mindful of not saying don't. But when we had our adopted daughter here with her two small children, I found myself saying don't and tempted to say don't multiple times during the day because there were so many things that the kids were, getting into, or, carrying their fruit around the house and getting their sticky fingers on things like that, when our kids were little, there was a lot of the don'ts going on. Okay, don't walk around the house with this. So it's shifting the words. Instead of saying, don't walk around the house with your fruit, I had to choose to say, please stay in the kitchen with your fruit. And then it was hard when it was like wanting to leave the kitchen to say, instead of saying, hey, don't leave the kitchen, keep your fruit here, it was having to just say, keep your fruit here in the kitchen. Please stay in the kitchen. No, that's not okay. And it's hard because it's completely changing the way that we speak sometimes. It's just like should. Should, when we use should, it is always, and yes, I'm using always, connected to shame. I should or I shouldn't is always connected to a core of shame. And so for the last, since Brene Brown's work came out in 2010 about shame and her shame research, I chose to start learning how to, instead of saying should, I desire or I could do this, or shouldn't, maybe I would choose not to do that, those kinds of things. So it's really being mindful of what's coming out of our mouths, and that's really difficult to do sometimes because we're so familiar with, well, it's deep-seated, these things that we've learned from childhood.
Yes, and Atomic makes a really good point. A double negative is a funny thing. So we don't understand. So the story we tell is, the 2 or 3-year-old child gets up onto the brick wall and stair steps up, and all of a sudden he's on the 6-foot-high fence. Mama sees him from the house, runs outside, and what does she say? Don't fall. What does the child think? Well, first of all, don't, as we've talked about, doesn't really mean anything to our brain. So then, okay, don't goes away. That's done. What does fall mean? Okay, fall. Well, you look down to the ground and you see what would happen if you were to fall off. I'm going to fall. Exactly. You visualize. We literally think in pictures. And so when we say don't, it's interesting to know, for things like purity conferences, encouraging teenagers to abstain from sex. So you have this, conference and you give them a promise ring and they keep the ring on, and the idea is don't have sex, right? Well, guess what the statistics are on what happens when a teenager attends a purity conference as opposed to those that don't? They are more likely to have sex within 6 months of attending a purity conference than they are not, because of this problem. They are far more tempted, and then they have a ring on their finger sometimes, or some other symbol that they use, and so they think, don't do this, don't do this. And guess what your brain is saying? What does don't mean? What does sex mean? And so there's this phenomena in our culture where we tend to go on diets. Don't eat ice cream. Don't eat ice cream. Well, guess what? And so what we have to do is, like Marla said, put it in the positive. And this is the beginning of a boundary. How do we build a boundary that has a yay, ice cream is right. How do we have a boundary that is healthy? And so fast forward to Natalia's blog, which is an excellent blog. Sometimes no is a way of loving. Sometimes no is the ticket that we have to developing a bigger relationship, a better relationship. And so how do we do it? How do we develop better boundaries?
Again, boundaries are tricky. It needs to be first in the heart before it's in the words. Something that we teach our clients is a phrase that is a very powerful phrase, but it's very difficult to do, to speak. For me. For other people, it's a piece of cake. And that phrase is, this is not okay with me. And that phrase helps to be able to clarify that right now this is not okay with me, and this is what I would like to see, or I need some time to think about it. I need some time to think about it is a great thing, particularly in my situation where I had that fear of being disapproved of and always saying yes and those kinds of things. And yes, I was really, truly always up until the last, 3 or 4 years it's gotten really good. But before that, man, difficult to say no to people, especially because when we were in a nonprofit environment and our donors were saying, I need you to do this and this needs to happen, it was like, oh, we may not get the funding if we don't do this. And that's just sad, and very, very sad. And so being able to say to myself, okay, what am I choosing? I needed to find myself worthy enough to choose to say, give me some time to think about this and I will get back with you tomorrow. Most of the time when you are able to say that, you can process it and you can come back with a good response if you need to. The other piece to this is it's so easy to say, okay, let me think about it, and then you think about it, and then you say, no, it's not a good time for me, or whatever the words are that you need to use. It's not a good time for me. And to not just go on and explain why. I have found myself very much wanting to say, oh, I can't do that right now for you because blah, 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 blah. It kind of went along with this great thing of, oh, I'm crazy busy. Look how busy I am. Well, crazy busy is just disassociation, disconnection, checking out. And I learned that. Jamie's dissociation was obvious. You could see his eyes kind of glaze over and he'd step behind this big wall and there was nothing that you could get conversation to get into that space. for me, you couldn't see my checking out very well because I was thinking, okay, what's the next thing on the agenda? We could be talking, and I would be saying, okay, what am I doing? Okay, we have this appointment at this time, and oh, what am I going to make for dinner? And, making love and saying, oh, what's going to be for dinner? Oh, what do I need to do to manage the kids when they were living in our house, in our space? So it's being able to honor yourself and respect yourself enough to take the time to say, let me think about it, let me honor myself, and be able to say no, or be able to say, this is not a good time for me, or whatever you need to do without having to explain why. People don't necessarily need to know why you're not able to help them at that moment.
So Barbie makes a good point. When you say this is not okay with me, isn't that make it okay if we don't hear the not? And so, yes and no. The thing about this is not okay with me is that you're not so much telling the other person no as you are letting them know that you have a boundary. And so, yeah, there's almost impossible to say something, to reject something, have a boundary and keep it firm, let's say, without using not or no. It's the other tool that we're learning to use better is yes and. So if there's any part of the request, or I'm going to say the word imposition for now, that is okay, you can say, so okay, can I borrow your motorcycle? Yes. And as soon as you get your motorcycle license and get your own insurance, you're welcome to borrow my motorcycle. And so there may be that the yes and is a hard one, that you have to have an out to be able to use it, meaning there has to be an option that is available to you. But let's back up a minute so that you can understand that issue a little better. When we talk about the boundary with interpersonal stuff, and so, like Natalia's blog, it is, you say, which she kind of expresses in her experience there, is she kind of let something slide, and it continued to grow. Like, okay, I'll put up with it this time, but then next time I'll say no, but then the next time happens and they've already had permission or done it or whatever, and then it gets worse, and it tends to develop a real conflict. And so the real trick to all of the skills that we are talking about here in developing a boundary is being aware of how you feel. So if we back up a minute and we react with, and we are able to sort our feelings so that we're very present to the moment. Being very present means that I don't have some leftover emotional stuff that may be interfering with how we interact. So the illustration about that today is going to be about Marla and I moved last week. We moved our home and our office to a new location. And it's a fantastic new location, but it's also, about 1,000 feet smaller than what we had before. Particularly the living space is a lot smaller. So we've have, 27 and a half years, well, I guess it's just 27 years of marriage, 29 years of relationship stuff. So I have probably 300 pounds of pictures in boxes, some of them in quadruplet. And it was the hottest week of the year last week. It always is when we move somehow. And so guess what happens? Marla and I are moving, and we got a little grumpy. Yes, we are picture hoarders. That's exactly right. When I figured out how many boxes of pictures we have together, I was like, how can we possibly have this many pictures? And think about it. Most of the last few years have been digital. Yes, I was a little grumpy. It was very hot. I was very tired, and I was lifting everything that we own 3 to 4 times. and so, and so, I wasn't processing as currently as I could. So when I was lifting stuff out of well, actually, the real conflict happened after we got to the other part, got to the new place, and I need Marla's creative eye for the decorating, where to put the pictures and where to, put the couch and things like that. And so I was impatient when I asked for Marla's help because I wasn't processing my frustration and my heat exhaustion very well. So I wasn't able to set better, healthy boundaries in my requests. And then Marla got frustrated with me, like, why do you always interrupt me when I just walk out of the room, that kind of thing. And she was totally legit. If I would have been more current, I would have seen that she was busy. I would have been able to process what I needed to do in the more current moment. It's not a great illustration, but I think it makes sense to people. If I'm working with you or around you, or we have a relationship, and there's something that I don't like that's happening, or there's an imposing on my will or my boundary space, if I'm not current, I have a harder time setting a clear boundary. And so if we use the wheel to develop that current processing, it is through forgiveness. I had an interesting conversation with Peace. I'm sure it would be okay for me to share this piece. We talked about how our processes are similar, and that, we're really kind of unwinding the way Peace puts it is unwinding. What'd you say, Peace? Uncomplicating the chakras, loosening the conflicts in the different chakras, and the way I interpret that, the way I process that, is that we kind of store conflict in different places in our body. And this conflict requires a level of forgiveness so that we can have a new boundary. And as we have this new boundary, we are able to be clearer about, like what Marla said, this is not okay with me. Now, how we relate that, as Barbie brought up, is that we need to be focused and aware about the not. Don't say don't. So you have to be kind of creative. Yes, Marla can be very amazingly hot-headed.
I'm much better than I used to be. That's for sure.
Well, I hope we all are. Yes, and so being aware allows us to be more current and to have something good to say to that person that says, I expect you to keep doing the thing that you've done before, even though it was a favor. We recently had a conflict with someone who we did a favor for a couple of times, and then they started to expect it. And when we said, no, this is the real issue, this is the way we're really going to do it, we just did that as a favor to you before, it was like, you're making this up. You're changing the deal, basically, is what this person said. And it's very frustrating because, no, we were clear about the deal before. We made an exception as a favor, and we're no longer going to do that favor because it continues to be an inconvenience for us, and we're not okay with this. And so that left the relationship in kind of a less than fun place. There's this kind of overriding conflict. I want you to keep doing this thing for me, and we're not willing to do it. And so that boundary wasn't well set up. Well, it was. We thought it was well set up, but maybe not very well understood by our associate. And so figuring that out is, we almost cannot avoid conflict. You're going to have conflict. If you're going to have relationships, you're going to have conflict. And so a couple of the things that make the best sense with setting up these boundaries are choosing to forgive if there's been a hurt, and giving that hurt some space so that you can decide what your boundary really needs to be. When we try to do it out of our hurt, like we were a little hurt by this person, and we were like, no, this is not okay, and then they became upset. If we could have had a longer conversation and been a little more clear with why we weren't going to do it, there may have been a better understanding. And so that's kind of where we're headed with what does no mean to your brain? And so what we use is a tool called Cancel Cancel.
So Cancel is a really powerful tool that I have really had to learn well, particularly with my recovering approval addiction and perfectionism, as well as needing to be more mindful and shift the way that I think about things. So for me, I had basically a 6-lane freeway of my neurosynapses, this freeway in my brain of neurosynapses that went from my basal ganglia to my prefrontal cortex. And it was, okay, the more reptilian brain saying, the initial amygdala response, fight, flight, or freeze, saying, this is not okay, you need to say yes, or you need to do these things to gain approval. And that was I would just automatically do it instead of being mindful and thinking about what I was doing and what I was saying and honoring myself again. And so the Cancel, we started, Jamie learned this back in 1989. 87. And so we started teaching this in the early 90s. When you have a negative thought or when you speak something negative about yourself or someone else, being able to immediately say, cancel, this is not who I choose to be, or this is not the thing that I want to let my mind stay in, this negative space. Cancel, I choose, and then choosing whatever it is, a really positive, for me, it's my safe, beautiful, large space that has myself and my family and my friends, and there's connection and community, and maybe we're at the beach, and it's just casting up this beautiful vision of what I want my life to be like. And basically it's centered around peace, empowerment, joy, and love. And so say, okay, right now I'm feeling afraid, and okay, cancel. And sometimes fear is, obviously, you need to feel fear to do what you need to do and take action. Sometimes fear is just because, oh shoot, I'm being disapproved of right now. Or the fear of judgment. That was one of my biggest things, fear of being judged. And so here I am in this fear of being judged. Okay, wait a minute. Cancel. I choose to live in hope and trust. Because across from critical, skeptical, and cutting, the fear of being criticized, and then feeling skeptical about myself, the opposite of that on the feeling wheel that you see behind us is hopeful, trusting, nurturing, thankful, secure, and independent. And so learning that I could shift from that fear into that peace and that empowerment and that joy, and stop the 6-lane freeway in my brain. And I practice cancel still quite often, so that hopefully, yes, I am. I'm becoming way more mindful. I see what my mind is doing. I'm kind of watching the watcher. I'm watching myself watch myself, which sounds a little bit strange, but in the meditative experience, you can be in that space where you're watching thoughts go by and that are attached to feelings or whatever. You can watch those go by and you can say, okay, I can choose to engage in that thought, and this thought over here, that's not healthy for me, so I need to cancel that out and bring up my vision of what I want for my life and not what I used to have for my life. I don't need to stay in the past. I can be present and I can be hopeful of my future. And I can be present in a space that is empowered, where I am aware and proud and feel respectful of myself and others, where I have appreciation and I feel important and faithful, and all those in that green wedge in the feeling wheel. And has this been easy for me? Absolutely not. It's so easy for my brain to just go off into some whatever line of thinking and then go, wait a minute, I want to be mindful right now. And choosing mindfulness, saying, okay, what's going on in my brain and how can and even my heart and my gut, and how can I have continuity with my gut and my heart and my brain and be present all at the same time.
Exactly. And that's a lot of work, by the way. It doesn't happen easily necessarily. We are so trained and so distracted in our current culture. We always have some kind of distraction going on around us practically. So to learn this skill about cancel, it's fascinating stuff. The double negative, Atomic brought up earlier, double negatives are not, this isn't exactly a double negative, this is a double word. And so it turns out, and this is the great news, that there was a great article just a couple of weeks ago, a research paper about the double word, and it doesn't have to be, it can be any word. The ones we like are cancel, love, think, feel. And using them in combinations has actually been proven to be very effective for your brain, and the neurobiology that's coming out right now is just amazing. So when I learned this, yes, hug, I like that one. That's a good one. And so, yeah, what that does is it stops the brain from going down that 6-lane highway that Marla talked about. So what happens is, when Professor Hal Milken in 1987 was teaching anatomy, he would do these great illustrations where he would say, visualize a giant skull, and I'm standing where the brain should be, and there's a muscle that attaches to the jaw right here, and he would illustrate it, and then down to the clavicle, what muscle is that? And he'd point to somebody in the audience, sometimes me, and I would say, pes anserinus, which is not the right answer. And he would say, no, that's the wrong answer. Cancel. And what is the right answer? And it's sternocleidomastoid, right? So that's the muscle. And so then and the reason why he said that is he said, if I don't do the cancel for the whole class, I'll get the pes anserinus answer, which is incorrect, on the test more often than I get the right answer. So we have to cancel that out, and we have to replace it with the new one. And so, like Marla said, we have these habits that become a very powerful pathway in our brain. And the way that works is that your prefrontal cortex says, I brush my teeth every day. So I don't have to think about that very much. I'm going to put this habit into the basal ganglia. And from the basal ganglia, we will develop motor memory. And the motor memory is both in the brain and in the body. Fascinating information that maybe we'll cover next week about heart memory, and the lady from California that got the heart from Chicago and had nightmares and actually identified the man's killer, having never met or even been to Chicago, because the memory was in the heart. And so we have this ability to have memory both in our body and in our brain, And what happens is that motor pathway develops a connection, and oftentimes those connections are facilitated by adrenaline or oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. And so when those are reinforced, they become very powerful habits. And these are the habits that I was talking about that we develop oftentimes before we're even 2 years old. And when we have that habit, it's very difficult to break. So tonight, when you go home and brush your teeth, try using your non-dominant hand. And that will illustrate just how difficult it is to change a habit that you already have. And so when we take this double word, and when you identify something, okay, so my best illustration about this is cussing. Yes. The gums bleeding or hurting yourself or not getting all the plaque off your teeth will be the result, I promise. You won't be able to finish unless you've practiced this before or you happen to be totally gifted and you're ambidextrous. But most people, we can't hardly brush our teeth with a non-dominant hand. It's very difficult. And so, cussing. So, funny thing, about 5 or 7 years ago, we were experiencing a great success in our work here with our coaching, and things were going very well. And for the first time in my life, I had real confidence. Shockingly, it was like amazing. This confidence felt so amazing. And so I had this confidence, and Marla says to me, you've been a little short with me lately, and you've been cussing a lot more. Now, it turns out that cussing actually alleviates pain. They've done studies where, people, when they cuss, the pain actually decreases in their body. And so I was like baffled by this, why am I cussing more and why am I being short with Marla? So I kind of did some thinking and processing on this, and I realized that I had a lot of false confidence. And I developed my false confidence when I was in high school. And I discovered when I was a sophomore in high school that that if I cussed louder in the locker room and I acted tougher and I stuck my chest out, that I got a certain kind of respect. I'm not saying that it was authentic. I'm not even sure it was real, but I believed it. And so that was very powerful for me. I was very insecure. And so having this newfound confidence was just amazing. But that meant that I cussed a lot. I was not a pleasant teenager, actually. When I think about it, I was kind of foul-mouthed and very insecure. Although I did have an approval addiction like Marla, so I had a lot of people liked me, and I was able to not cuss in front of the adults. So probably they thought better opinions of me than my peers. But then fast forward that 20 years, and suddenly now I'm getting some real confidence. Well, that real confidence said, oh, look, I have an easy brain pathway already built, even though it's 20 years old. I'll just use that. And so I would jump from the real confidence to the fake confidence, to the false, to the bravado that I had as a teenager. And so I had to in knowing the cancel skill at this point, it only took me about 3 days to virtually eliminate the cussing, except for effect. We cuss for effect every once in a while because it really is a powerful tool. And we try to be courteous about that, and depending on our audience. But it really, in 3 days, I eliminated that bad habit of dropping the F-bomb. And it was very effective.
Another tool that I have used for creating more mindfulness, changing those negative thought processes, was back in the 90s, early 90s, when we were learning this information. And discovering that I did not feel worthy of being loved. It was for me, it was a thing of not good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, whatever, not enough. And so I decided that I needed to write out an affirmation, I am worthy, just starting with I am worthy. And I wrote that affirmation 50 times a day for a month. And it was the craziest thing because I did start feeling worthy. It's amazing what happens with your brain, and your unconscious doesn't know the difference between me and you. So I'm telling myself, I am worthy, and my unconscious says, oh, okay, we're worthy. That's good. And that sounds a bit schizophrenic, and because, it's the splitting of the brain, but it's how your unconscious really does have a mind of its own. And so bringing your unconscious to your conscious, to your being mindful of what's going on there, you are able to then change the negative thinking to the positive. And I'm not sure if we already mentioned this research that they did, but the research was on people who had cancer, and they had, okay, we're going to give you positive thinking, meditation, group conversations so that you can have support and accountability and have that kind of environment. And so they did the study with people on and it was all people with stage 4 cancer, different types of cancer. And they said, okay, we're going to see how these things can help people, and see if they are able to beat it and live. And so it was a longitudinal study, and they discovered that the people who just had the positive thinking, that there was no change in their unconscious thinking, but their positive thinking was, I'm going to beat this, I'm going to do great, having those same conversations. But in the back of their mind, literally in their unconscious kept speaking to them, you're not going to make it. This is going to kill you. And those are the people that ended up dying. Now, it wasn't 100% one way, 100% the other way, but it was definitely big enough for a researcher to say, oh, wow, this is important. Because what your unconscious thinks can override anything that your conscious is putting out there. And so being aware of your unconscious thinking is a really important tool and skill to again, become mindful. Watch the watcher. Watch what's going on in your mind so that you can grasp those things that are negative and get rid of them and eliminate them. And it's the layers of the onion. For me, it's a daily process. Get rid of one thing and something else pops up. Oh, now I need to work on that.
Yeah, and that was fascinating. It was a fascinating study to follow, and I know that little voice on the outside of my head that says things like, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so dumb." I actually hear my dad's voice sometimes when he would rage and call me names. I sometimes hear those names, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not me. That's not about me. I have to cancel that out and refocus so that I don't get so down on myself. It's very difficult to completely knock out those little subtle habits of putting yourself down or even other people. So yeah, we'd like to open up to questions, comments, situations. Scenario: do you have an idea how you can apply cancel, cancel, hug, hug, kiss, kiss to your life? Okay, Atomic. I always think about the elementary school principal that once told me, in describing his favorite teacher as a child, my teacher thought that I was smarter than I was, so I was. Yes, I have an interesting story about that as well. In my practice as an occupational therapist, I would often get referrals between November and, as late as April from teachers that were frustrated with usually boys between first and third grade. North American elementary school is actually geared better for girls than boys. The fine motor skills and the processing for most boys it's fine, but there's that, if there's an extra challenge, usually an emotional challenge at home, then these boys would have a hard time succeeding in school. Well, guess what? I was in special education between 2nd and 5th grade, and that was my issue. And I got a lot of these kinds of referrals, usually about 1 or 2 from every school that I worked at, and I think I worked at 25 schools. So I would take those kids, and they would barely qualify based on the testing that I would give for my service, and I would say, okay, they barely qualify, and I would go to the teacher, and I would say, they qualify, but only for a short time. I'm going to see them for just to the end of the school year. And so I would see them, and I would tell the teacher, and I'd walk out of the room, and I'd say, oh, by the way, I think this kid is really a lot smarter than he appears. And they would say, really? I had no idea. And so I would do some confidence training with them and some strengthening for their fine motor and processing skills, visual processing. And then I would keep reinforcing that they were smart to the teacher, and pretty soon their grades would. The teacher started to believe that they were smarter, and so they did better than they could. So Atomic, that's a great story. Okay, question. How do we stay open to the idea that someone's complaints about us are true and we need to work on them instead of just canceling them away? Oh, good point. Marla,
I like that question, because for me, that was part of the thing. Instead of allowing someone's complaint about me to destroy me, I was able to say, okay, what's the kernel of truth in this? And, okay, finding the kernel of truth and not canceling away the kernel of truth, saying, okay, this is something that is important and I need to be working on this. Canceling away would be more about canceling the thing that is hurting you, the thing that is causing you to spin out into saying, I'm a bad person, or shoot, why did I do that? I should have done this. Why didn't I? Whatever that is. And so you don't necessarily cancel out the complaint someone has. You listen to it. You hear the kernel of truth in it, because almost everything has a kernel of truth. You find that kernel of truth. You say, yes, this is something that I can work on. And then it's the negative thought processing that you want to cancel away. Shoot, I wish I were wish I were perfect. And so hopefully that answers your question. And am I saying this right? Charisse or Shirese? Is that how you say this is Jade, right? Okay. Kyrese. Oh, I like that. That's nice.
Interesting note about the teacher telling somebody else that you're going to do well. That's different than believing that you're smarter than you are in a small way. The power of belief can be stronger if it's unspoken, and that kind of goes back to that electromagnetic wave that is given off by our hearts and the pheromones around us. By setting up a positive intention, sometimes we can miss the intention because we either believe, like in this case, believe that we're so good at it that we've already achieved it, and then we don't need to prove anything, kind of thing. So that's an interesting subtlety when you get into this being intentional and growing. Yeah, being smart and not knowing it. That was, here, I can testify to that. I was in special education for 4 years, and nobody expected me to even really attend college much, but I was able to, graduate from a professional program. So I was smarter than they gave me credit for. Okay, questions about cancel and situations that we could be, how can we use it better? Okay. Quiet group today. What we'd like to do is have a couple of volunteers, 1 or 2 volunteers maybe.
Another question.
Oh, we have another. Oh, so when you have
Have an
illness,
yeah. So when you have an illness, use cancel, cancel. That is a first good one to use. Yes, it's that watching the watcher again. What is your unconscious mind speaking? What is it saying? What is the core foundational belief? It's really about a core foundational belief that you had from the womb, possibly, but a core foundational belief from childhood that says, nope, I'm not going to make it. And so checking on that, it's that little nudge in your heart that says, you're saying, yes, I'm going to make it. I'm going to be great. I'm going to live, whatever that is. If you have an illness, I'm going to get better. And then that little nudge in your heart that says, this is bullshit. Excuse the language. But and so when you have that little feeling in your heart that says, this is not true, say, okay, where does that come from? And why is it that I'm in this space of believing that I'm not going to get healthy again? So it's pulling the two things together and saying, okay, yes, cancel. This is my IMAX, living passionately, living with the people that I love. So you're taking that little piece that says, no, I'm not going to make it, that darkness, and you're shrinking it, and you're making it very, very small. And you're shrinking it, and you're going to put it in your hand, and you're going to cast it behind the moon. And then you're going to bring up the vision, your IMAX picture. It's as big as a huge IMAX screen. So it's 5 stories tall and, wide. And you're bringing up this screen that says, this is what I'm choosing. I'm choosing life. I'm choosing these relationships around me. I'm choosing all these things that are in my dream, in my vision casting for my future. And so you're taking the dark, shrinking it, and making the light big and bright. So bright you have to wear shades.
exactly. And I would add to that the key is so when you have an illness, we have a book, we haven't read it yet. It's on the coffee table right here, and it's called Be the Placebo. The friend that gave us the book just says that a lot of the things we talk about are kind of in that book. And so embracing the positive, like that study that we mentioned earlier, is a very powerful concept. But you have to be aware of what that little voice is saying on the edge of your consciousness. That false belief we have that we are going to be wrong in some way or sick in some way. And so this is a hard topic because illness is real, and we all die of something. And so to confront health and to believe positively about my body and my mind and my soul, we'll say, you have to be able to dig into what that negative is coming from. And that's where we use forgiveness again. And forgiveness, when you hear that little voice that says, you're stupid, for me, it's, you're stupid. I'm so stupid. I find myself saying that out loud sometimes. And dang it, I don't want to say that, right? Cancel. And so I have to go in. It's not enough just to cancel it. The question is, how does this work, right? How do I take feedback seriously? I don't want to just cancel the negatives away just because they're negative. Sometimes they're real. So we have to go in and we need to forgive that area, the people involved, the situation involved, and eventually ourselves, so that we can be more present to what's going on with that little voice, and really extinct it, rather, like Marla said, shrink it, put it behind the moon. That doesn't work if we're hanging on to a false belief, or what I would call with peace, a kink in my chakras. Right? And so yes, there's a way of digging into this healthfully and identifying what it is that we believe about ourselves, so that we can believe positively. And we have such an unlimited potential. There's so much good to live for in this world, even if we are sick or having a disease process that's not going away easily. There's so much we can do. I have some of the most amazing people I have met through hospice. And they have this bright, shining ability to transcend the pain that they are in and be present to the people around them in a way that others, sometimes never get to. And so, yeah, there's a very big... Go ahead.
No, finish that. There was just another thought about the visualization, asking about just cancel, or needing visualization, and I was just going to answer that. But go ahead, finish what you were thinking.
No, I was just saying there's a very powerful resources available to us that we can tap into really at any time. And yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead, Marla.
No, yes, absolutely. Visualization is part of it. And what you can do with like I was saying, shrinking the dark and then casting that behind the moon, that's really visualization. That's closing your eyes, shrinking the darkness till it's the size to fit inside of your fist, and then throwing it as hard as you can and visualizing it going behind the moon and becoming just out there, and you can't see it anymore. And then bringing up this bright light vision of what it is that you want your present and your future to look like. And so, yes, visualization is a big part of that. Okay.
Great topic. Man, we burned through the hour really fast. Feels like we just went very fast. I think I missed some of the text as I was talking. So if there's any leftover questions, please feel free to bring them up again. One thing I'd like to mention, we would like to initiate some small groups from this group to meet maybe just after this group, or sometime, whatever works for the group. We'd like to keep the groups fairly small, no more than 6 people. So if we had 1 or 2 volunteers to maybe spend a little extra time with, probably I would end up doing the training, so that you could lead a small group. We could have, okay, Barbie, excellent. And maybe 1 more or so. Just think about it. Anybody here, contact me or Marla, and we'd like to have a couple of small groups that meet after this. We might even try to shorten the lecture a little bit so that the groups could meet in the hour and facilitate more of a small group conversation, so that we can have a little bit more interaction with each other. I love this format. I think it's a great format for the general topics. But as we integrate some of these skills and some of these practices, it sometimes helps to kind of process with a little group. Oh, that's an idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea, Barbie. Meeting every other week, doing this the 1 week, and then the next week meeting with the small group during the same time.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I didn't record today's session. The last 2 are on YouTube, and I need to find the link. I don't have it with me right now, but that could be, yeah. Then it's not so overwhelming. And then all that. But I think these topics, this information is. This is years and years of research that has gone into some of these things, and the current research coming out to reinforce some of the things we didn't have research for is really profound. And so there's a lot to process with that, and if we have some time to have a small group discussion, that would be very powerful. Oh, excellent. KJ's recording. Excellent. Oh, and there's, I think, so KJ, we'll talk after. Excellent. Yeah, very excited to have you guys. Thank you all for coming and participating. We want to keep to our hour timeline. And so thank you all for being here.